Welcome back. In this update I'm finishing off the area that I started in the last video, the town between the coal plant and the build area. Starting off exactly where I left off the last video, I decided to work on the building I tried to start on before it crashed in the last second, which I eventually moved over to the slot in front and then decided, sod it, I'm going to turn it into an enterable building. This might be a bit of foreshadowing. While I had some fancy features on the road bit here, such as the white road piece acting as a nice detailing for the road and the pavement, I opted to remove it and have it as a standard blank road, because I ended up making some changes to the size due to the buildings I ended up putting here. I was originally hoping to keep a little pedestrian path or alleyway in between them, but I decided to cut it out. The design of the building took me a little bit of time to nail down, as I had been thinking about using less building textures and more texture mashing to get that unique and more creative design going. I use this method later on and you'll get to see what gets made. Some people might think this is lazy, but I think that this is working smarter, not harder, when copy and pasting things like doors that I've made across the map. It also adds a bit of consistency, and I decided to slightly reshape some of these doors in particular as well. Later on, for example, I also made the same door, albeit thinner, but you'll probably see why I did that. With this building I was a bit unsure if I wanted it to be 2 stories, so for the time being I've made it a single story building with an upper unusable section. You'll find that lots of maps do this, some hide it better than others, but it's purely just for vertical aesthetics at this point. If players were to complain about it, I would go and revise the design a little bit. I found this area a little challenging, but wanted to see if I could stick any existing buildings into this space. Once I found one of my corner based buildings, I knew straight away it was the one I wanted to place there. I was also curious to see if I could make a unique design of having a micro car park in there to act as an office space. The main concern I had was that on the 2 arms of this office are doors, so I had to make sure it looked somewhat realistic with some kind of platform for people to step onto. After playing with the space of it, I decided that the left side should be the one to gain a car park entrance. This would also be a really fun place to hide, as I decided to place foliage here too. As a bit of a homage to my previous maps, I decided to look back through all of my prefabs to see if I could find anything that stood out to me that I could maybe place in the map. Those that did stand out were some offices that featured in maps like Simply Train or Carna Rail, for example, and it felt nice to use them once again. I had to make some adjustments though, such as adding doors or changing their size to make sure they fit. Might not seem like much, but it's honest work. I also ended up needing to sort out the walls of the room a little bit. The skybox, it was originally a little naff, so I tried to layer it with 2 tree card textures that I typically use at a distance, but I figured I could get away with using, and hopefully there is a little effect to make it look like there's trees when you approach at different angles. I've no idea if it will work, but I'm putting in the effort anyway. I tried to put actual foliage up against the cards for a better effect, but it's kind of hard because when you've only got a little bit of space, it's just really difficult. As for the middle part of the lower road section, I didn't want to just put 1 or 2 big buildings there but make it seem a bit busy. I really didn't know what to put here, so honestly I just mashed together a few buildings that clip into each other and tried to see if it works. It kinda does, but it's not that important as most people will just walk or drive past it. Before I started making the buildings, I actually asked some of the community for any recommendations, and one of the best ideas was a gas or petrol station, however you prefer it called. It makes sense, as the first version of this actually has one of these already, or it did, before I had to make some design changes that I felt were needed, but looking back, weren't that great. This was an opportunity to make use of this interesting space, and sometimes when you look at these spaces you can think, wow, I don't think that's going to work, but unless you give it a go, then you won't really know. If it works, then all is well, and if not, you can always try and revise the shape of the area. For example, I could and would have deleted the middle section with the buildings if it meant putting a petrol station here. Keeping vehicle operations in mind as well as train operations, I wanted to give this space a little extra detail for roleplay purposes. In many petrol stations you will see these pumps hidden away, sometimes in a dedicated space, sometimes just off to the side. These are clearly not accurate, as many petrol pumps in reality are for different chemicals such as petroleum, diesel or LPG, also known as liquefied petroleum gas, and have different colours. For the purposes of this map, it's not that deep and it will be sufficient to just have this small space on one side for now. Other than these small details, the petrol station contains a few pumps, some parking and a shop. This space was particularly interesting and made me scratch my head. I had space for multiple buildings, but one of them would be diagonal. I did wonder if I should try to make a unique diagonal enterable building, but decided against it. It would be a lot of effort for little gain, so instead I copy pasted some buildings already made that I already had across the map. They may not stay this way forever, and it depends on what other people think of these areas in the future, how they end up getting used. I particularly like the bank and restaurant, however, as I think they're good to introduce things for roleplay, such as delivering goods to the restaurant, tankers to the petrol station, or money collection to the bank. And just for good measure, I stuck a shop in as well. With the floor design, I opted for less grey and more colour, so I went with a nice red cobble brick for the floor accents around these buildings, giving them a bit of a unique flavour. This happens to track with the first version, as there was a brick flooring section too, so by coincidence it worked out quite nicely. With some buildings that I copy paste, I don't usually like to keep the same textures because I think that's a bit boring, so I will replace the textures, sometimes the stuff inside, but overall it's the same place. In the case of the restaurant and shop in this space, I made sure to replace some of the textures so when people walk in, they immediately see it's a different building. To finish off some of the detailing in this area, I also added in some displacement walls just to give it that extra touch. It's not much, but when you add in small details like this, it can make a big difference in how people perceive something like the quality of a map. It's fine to have blocky terrain, as evidenced by most of my maps, but if you add even a few displacements here and there at the right spots, people will nod and think, this mapper appreciates detail. With this particular corner office, I did want to take advantage of the interesting shape it holds in this space. In some maps, I have seen some interesting use of multiple group textures, so on occasion I tried to use them in a way that I think would be quite fitting. My inspiration for this building was one that I've seen in Manchester, UK, where it has this stony brick design on the bottom, and on top they've added this cladding for an office. So there's lots of examples around the UK of this kind of thing, where old Victorian buildings, for example, have modern architecture, if you can call it that, slapped on top. Sometimes it's needed, like an old building that has a great design but is structurally unsound, but they usually try to stick to the design. I wanted to do something just a little bit different. Here I am cycling through some old files I have to see what I can find to make this area more interesting. As I said earlier, I brought along two old office buildings from Simply Train and Carnar Rail. I almost left the last building in this row in a bit of a state, but I decided to go back on that execution and create a more interesting building. I immediately settled on the idea of a car dealership. The only thing I wanted this dealership to have was a spinning table, so people could make their showroom a little fancier. It also needed a double door for cars to go in and out if one was chosen, and reasonably a pedestrian entrance. I ended up making two offices as well, but simply made an empty for players to customise inside the dealership. I mentioned earlier about mashing textures together, which this particular area is using quite heavily. If you missed it before, you may believe I'm talking about blended textures, which is self-explanatory, but mashing textures together in this context basically means I'm taking a texture that appears to have a window in it and cutting a hole through that particular section of the texture, which allows me to go on the other side and create a window, or on both sides, potentially making it look interesting and fun, as you can see out but not in. The rotating table rotates very slowly, and I did consider speeding it up, but if I make it too fast, then Source might not like this and physics may take over to throw anything placed on it off. I can increase the friction, but I don't want to make it too hard to drive onto or off the platform if that was wanted, so I increased it to about 50% and kept the speed of the rotation slow to make it a bit more predictable. If it's ever mentioned that it's too slow, then I can always increase its speed a little bit. It gives me a little wiggle room and flexibility in case I have to change it later. There are still some touch-ups I need to finish off, but likely won't be in a video, which is essentially just adding some foliage, extra wall details like the tree cards, and ensuring it looks proper with no conflicting textures. In the meantime, thanks for watching this part of the Blackprise map touch-ups and development. At the end of the video, I've put some clips in the area of the post-compile, so I hope you enjoy.